Welcome to the Painful Lessons podcast with your hosts, Tyler Ramsey and Ben Goldhirsch.
Hey, this is Tyler Ramsey, and I'm here for Painful Lessons podcast with Tyler Ramsey and Ben Goldhirsch, produced by our terrific friend, Aaron. I kind of like you as being like a first name kind of cool guy.
I'll take
Do you like
it.
that? Okay. And we have got this dope guest today. His name is Nick Weidenfeld. And I feel like the thing that I'm very excited to talk to him about is that he has kind of a Forrest Gump ability. He has managed to find his way into some of the most incredible opportunities in like in almost like an accidental, surprising way. And I love anyone that is great at taking advantage of opportunities. And he seems like someone who's just terrific at that. He has been working in the field of animation for a long time and has been part of some of the most killer cartoons. Like I love Rick and Morty. I think it's like one of the greatest cartoons ever. He's been part of that. And he is on our podcast today. So get ready for this, Ben. Painful lessons. They've learned them.
So you don't have to.
Yes. Yes. Nick, welcome to Painful Lessons.
Thank you for having me.
Nick, I'm just curious how you would respond to that initial introduction.
I mean, I've never sort of seen you take the back seat, so I like it. I'm more interested. I'm more interested. It's the most beta I've ever seen Ben.
Amazing. Oh my God. The alliteration. Beta Ben. Oh my God.
That's why I'm here.
I have to say,
enjoying
that
the
does not
experience.
fit at all. That is not, beta is the wrong thing for Ben.
No, but I when Tyler was saying that, I was like, well, this feels insulting. And it's not how I would sort of describe you, but I want to know how you reacted to that.
To my introduction.
Yeah.
I will say I have heard. Well, look, I'm not great at taking compliments anyway, but I do think that it's nice to hear anybody say that they enjoyed stuff I've done. So I feel like, or had been a part of. So that felt really good. And I do think that I don't do a lot of this stuff. I don't, I've only done like a handful of podcasts. I typically am sort of not in front of any kind of camera, but I will say that, the idea that I've had the kind of like Forrest Gump or like, being there kind of career, it does come up. I've done a lot of different things. So that, it showed me that Tyler looked up some of what I've done because I have a weird career. So I feel good about it. Why would you think it's insulting?
Well, I just think Forrest Gump.
Well,
I question
mentally
whether
handicapped. That was.
No,
I don't
know.
I did.
Yeah. No. Wait, the way it was, it did not feel like. It didn't feel like handicap forward. I think that it was more just like understanding opportunity and sort of being in the flow. That's how I understood.
I'm glad you took it that way. Because that's not Tyler mentioned. No.
I also wasn't leaning on the fact that like Forrest Gump was notoriously chumped by his girl, who then who had sex with him, just like left him with the kid. And
I think Forrest Gump contains multitudes. I took the one very specific thing of finding his place that interesting at the right time. That's the part I took from
which
it.
Obviously is how Tyler meant it. And so let's talk about that. What is like? How would you reflect back on? Would you say the career has been going for two decades now?
Yeah,
is that a good kind of rough?
Yeah. I mean, this specific part of my career, the TV side of it, or like being in entertainment, on the entertainment kind of side. Yeah, it's been 20 years.
Yeah, and did it start at Cartoon Network?
Yeah, I mean the sort of, and I'm happy to. Do the slow version, but the sort of fast version of the story.
Do the interesting version.
Well, I mean that's sort of debatable, but
Cartoon Network to Vice to back.
So basically, what happened was, in the Forrest Gump element of it is that I had a magazine. I thought I'd be in print journalism. I was really interested in. I didn't love writing, but I loved being an editor and sort of putting the whole thing together. And that, I think that's key because that is more what it was in a totally different medium. But I was like, oh, I don't love writing, but I like the idea part and I like the packaging part. Like, oh, here's a story idea. Here's a person that I can work with writing it. And then there's a photographer that you could join. I like doing this, how it fits into a theme for an issue. Like I liked all this sort of macro thinking. And so I had that for, I started that in college, and it was sort of like a Vice adjacent kind of magazine called While You Were Sleeping. And it had some success. And then, like these things go, it just sort of, partner and I sort of, fell out, and the thing sort of fell apart, and I wasn't sure what I was going to do. And I'm about, just out of college. We'd done maybe a year or two out of college. And I did a couple weird turns, lived in an assisted living home for a while in Florida with my grandma, and then went and stayed with my brother and saw all these people were watching Adult Swim. And like everyone, all of his friends were watching Adult Swim, and like no one else was really talking about it, but it seemed so popular in like on this campus. And so I did some research, and I was like, wow, this thing is actually like, men are watching this. Like men 18 to 34-year-olds are watching this more than like Kimmel or any late night stuff. And so I pitched around and said, I want to write a story about this thing that seems very popular among a lot of people, but no one's, seems to be taking notice of. And ended up selling that idea for the story to Esquire, and went to Atlanta to go like do 4 days in Atlanta. No one had ever done a story on Adult Swim, and they were very, outside of the entertainment industry. It's a Turner company. They're located in Atlanta, run by a very kind of like fascinating, like outsider, like margin kind of dude who has his own the most interesting story. And I hung out, he's also pretty misanthropic. So he's like, he wasn't like meeting a lot of people. No one's coming there to do stories. He's not part of like any entertainment scene. And so I went down and did like 4 days living like in Atlanta and spending every day at the Adult Swim, which is this offshoot of the Cartoon Network, and, sort of like a pirate ship of sorts. And
By the way, I think
yeah,
that's a great way of describing. Like I, I remember thinking that Adult Swim was like one of the most interesting things. Like it was just this like, it just felt like such a bubble of creativity, like within all of entertainment.
yeah,
Like it felt like there were like maybe a bunch of pirates just walking in, pitching these goofy ass shows, and then probably just like so tickled the next day that they were going to make them.
yeah.
I must have just like
I
I
mean, it's
think it's
literally I mean, it's again, it's Adult Swim is its own sort of long, incredible story. But they moved across the street. They bought, started renting this, like I think a former carpet warehouse across the street, because they didn't want to be part of the Turner Company. And it's very sort of like this offshoot, and literally put up a pirate flag. I mean, that's how Mike
amazing.
Lazo, who sort of founded, not sort of, the sort of founder of Adult Swim, he he really saw it as this true pirate ship of, weirdos, and he and that's it. The way you think of it was really the way it was. And so I'm writing this story on him. We get along really well. We have a similar taste in comedy. W- Interestingly, we both are like very into Faulkner, and he collects Faulkner first editions, and I had been a Faulkner studies guy in college. And he was like, we just got on really well. And he was like, do you want to come work? I mean, actually what he said on my last interview, he's like, what are you doing when this is over? And I was like, well, I'm going to write the story. And he's like, after that. And I was like, well, hopefully people, I can write more stories and figure out, I don't have the sort of, vision I had when I was running this magazine, but I want to sort of be in print journalism. And he's like, why don't you come work here? And I was like, I don't think so. Like, I really don't think that like moving to Atlanta, living in, being in TV, I just I really didn't, I considered it because I was flattered, but I didn't really consider it. And I was like 23. And then I went back, to New York, and I would get these phone calls like once a week from him being like, talk to HR, and we got a job for you. You're the head of development. Like it was like a real job.
You
And
went
so
in for the interview. You went in to interview
interview
the
him.
guy, and then during that interview, he goes, "You seem sharp."
Yes.
And I guess we don't really spend a lot of time trying to find sharp people. So you're one. And do you want to just like run our network?
I think
Well,
this.
it's like, oh, go
Would
back.
you know, like, just Nick, since we gave you no background on what we're doing here,
Yeah.
the
I did listen
objective.
to some episodes. I did some homework, but
Okay.
I know we're trying to find the painful part of
No,
whatever
I
and
think
not the
like
positive part.
no, wrong. You
Yeah,
totally fucked up your analysis.
missed it.
Um,
Missed it.
it's
I'm
all
fucking
it's
with you.
all about it's all towards the end of sharing wisdom. And
Yeah.
I think we're really interested in obviously celebrating all aspects of the wisdom generation part, including the painful parts.
Yes.
But like I think as we go along, like there's times to like call things out. And like when I think about talking to my kids about this conversation, it's cool to see how interest begets opportunity. Because I think
Yeah.
people are really like focused on opportunity more than interests. Because it's like,
Yeah.
oh, opportunity is what I want. Interests are just like something I have.
Well put.
But it's amazing to
Mm.
see when someone actually pursues their interest, what opportunities avail. Anyway, continue.
I know.
I'm really excited about the story.
I actually think that's really interesting because separately, I was talking, a friend of my dad's who was a big magazine guy. When I was in college, had a lot of magazines in Washington D.C. and had a lot of success. And I remember he was like, "You got to get out of print journalism." And I was like, "Why?" And he's like, "It's fucked," And I was like, "He's like, you should go to Hollywood and like work." And I was like, "How?" Like that seemed so crazy. And he was like, the way it works is you go get a job at, in the mailroom at one of the agencies at WME. And I was like,
Yeah.
I was like, already like, I'm out, dude. Like I say that, Ben, because I think that's one of those where it's like, I'm looking for the opportunity and not the interest. And
Yeah.
I was like, had no interest. Like I didn't see that. I had no interest in it. I wouldn't even know what that meant. And that is what a lot of people do. And I think that there's
Oh
nothing
yeah.
wrong with that. I actually think that there's a lot of learning to be had in moving your way up. I wish sort of more people did it. But like the idea of going into this business that I don't immediately have an interest in because like looking for the opportunity to move up, I had been told that and I was so immediately like turned off that I sort of never thought about it again. And I think that it was sort of in the back of my mind when this guy said that. And I was like, I don't know about this. But then, the more we talked, and he is such an interesting guy. And, we would have these long conversations that were mainly about comedy or about Faulkner, about TV. And I was very interested. Why are men my big angle on this was like, why are young men watching this when at the time there was a show called The Man Show, which Jimmy Kimmel was doing with Adam Carolla, which was like obviously like girls on trampolines. Like it was called The Man Show. It was like obviously that's like geared towards dudes, right? You're like, I know men are like watching this, but then you have
Tyler's super into the Man Show.
I loved it. I loved it. And I think since then Jimmy Kimmel has that was he was amazing at that. And
Yeah.
yeah,
but and by the way, I guess it is like it's like when you watch it, it's incredible that it was on TV, incredible show for sure,
amazing. It's
amazing.
I stand apart. We stand apart on that.
But we stand apart. Look, honestly, I don't remember it that well, but I do remember watching it and going, I know why men would watch this, why Adult Swim, which is not gendered in like any obvious way. It's just sort of nerdy and surreal. Like it's very Dada. It doesn't make why that over indexes with dudes. I was like, that's interesting to me, and then I started thinking like Monty Python's the same. Like, again, not you gender everything, but you could be around and be like group of not necessarily going to go up to a group of girls you're hitting on and want to talk about Monty Python with them. There's just it's like very interesting why that happened, why that was happening and what the interest was. And that was like the conversation with Lazo.
Right.
And I feel like, and then our sense of what do we like and what, I don't think they were looking. And he was like, why don't you come work here? And he was, we talked for a while and I finally said, you know what? Okay. And on some level, it might have been a way of avoiding writing this article because then I called my editor and I said, hey, I got this job offer. I was like halfway through this article. It was sort of a large profile. And he was like, well, you can't take this job and like write this article because of, some sort of journalistic integrity. You can't like have a job for these guys. But I was like, well, and he was like, well, what if you go there for a year? You learn about it. And you sort of maybe either come out with a larger story or maybe, and then my mind was like, maybe there's a book there. Like this thing really could start to pop off. And so I went there and I was like, all right. And frankly, I didn't have like a ton else. It wasn't like I didn't have anything else going on, but I was like, that was the most interesting thing I mean, there wasn't like anything like fully keeping me back, I guess.
Yeah,
You know
didn't
what I
have a lot
mean?
going on. Didn't have a lot
Yeah.
going on.
Um,
You were kind of like
and
Fletch, like when because
yeah,
Fletch was a journalist. He didn't have a lot going on, and
yes, I was
you
very,
really
I
cracked
was,
that case.
I was very much, in a lot of ways, other experience. I was very much like Flesh. That's come up a bit too. So I moved to
Fletch.
Atlanta.
Some people call you Fletch.
Well, when
A
I was,
great compliment.
I had this like brief sojourn. I told you I lived in where I really didn't have anything going on, and I moved to Florida, and I ended up living in this assisted living home with my grandma, and I
I'm
was
so story, and I can't wait for us to get into this.
yeah,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I was an investigative reporter for the city paper, and so
Oh.
so there has been times that people have been like, oh yeah, there's like a remake of Fletch in that, because I'm like living in an old person's home,
Were
like
you
partying
investigating the
really
old?
hard.
Were you investigating the old person's home?
No, but I was seeing things that were happening to the like specifically. My one big story for the sort of 6-8 months that I was living there, maybe it was 8 months I was living there, was I noticed that all the old people, there are all these like weird casino slot machines were popping up, and these old people were spending all their money and time, and there's gambling's illegal in Florida and Broward County, but they were, so instead I was like, how is this operating? And there was this loophole, this like legal loophole, that if they spent money and they won, but they only won like gift cards like to Walmart, then it wasn't gambling.
So they can lose money, but
They
they
can
can
lose a
only
lot of money. And yeah, and it's like no one, exactly. So I was like, well, this is this insane legal loophole. Like that's like basically taking total advantage of,
total advantage.
of
Is
this
that
old
loophole still
community.
open or no? Is that been closed?
That's a great question. I should see if it has been, I haven't followed up on my own
What?
investigation.
The
But
real Fletch would have followed up on
but
that.
I the truth is real Fletch probably wouldn't have. And so and so there has been, but that was a very funny, especially because I was young and I was like partying really hard, and then hanging out with all these old people. It was yeah,
That
it
seems
was
very cool.
it
Okay.
was sort of cool. But back to this. So I moved to
Yeah.
Atlanta. I moved. So I say, all right, this makes sense. I'll go move there and see what. And I don't quite really know what the job is. I've never worked in TV. I don't have any friends that work in TV or film. And so I moved to Atlanta, and I think maybe he's going to want me to start kind of an Adult Swim magazine. Like print journalism wasn't like totally dead then, and I was like, I was like, oh, maybe that's what I'm here to do. And then he was like, you'll sort of figure out your job. But I'll tell you, and I was like, well, what do you need me to do? And this is not how TV is, but no one knew what Adult Swim was. So no agents were calling. There was only 2 or 3 shows on the air that they had made, and they all had made those internally. And he goes, well, now, we get a lot of pitches sent to us. So like just normal dudes would just write ideas and send them to them, and in like envelopes with drawings. And he was like, we have about 200 that have come in. Your job is to just go yes, no, maybe piles.
Oh my God.
And I read through 200 of them, or 500 or whatever it was. It takes me, I don't know, a couple months, and they're all no's, right? Like they're all bad. Like there's nothing really in there. And I was like, well, maybe I need to figure out then what this job is, because it's certainly, I'm not going to find anything in sort of it, like something being passively submitted to me. And so I sort of figure out that, okay, my job is going to be that I'm going to help this guy and this group of people that are so interesting living in Atlanta, sort of off the, Hollywood grid. I'm going to help them find shows that are consistent with their like tone and ethos, but like are not with people they know. So I'll have to go find those people to help this business grow and scale, because they're not going to grow outside of these 4 walls, which is what makes it really interesting. It's what's established, I think, what was so cool about it. And so I just start calling people, like people I'm fans of.
That's
So I
called
call.
moxie.
Like what? Yeah,
You
like
had moxie.
because I want to get into your sort of
Yes, for
talent
sure.
discovery head
Sure.
and heart, because I think there's something really special there. But so walk us through that process. You're like, all right, this is not reactively going to happen. I
No,
proactively want to pursue this.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think I'm like at some point, like I do a handful of different jobs, and I realize, okay, the opportunity here for me, that like the creative opportunity, is to help make, because obviously they want more shows and they want to grow, and they just don't. That's not. They're not outward facing like that. They're all, most of the people work there are, born and raised in the area. They're all from Atlanta or outside Atlanta, and I'm this, this outsider brought in, and I'm extroverted and I like talking to people, and so literally I call. I mean, this is, when I think about it, it was just it's very clear. I didn't know what to do, so I'm like, who's a comedy writer that I like, and I was like, I'm a really big fan of Robert Smigel. So
Oh yeah, TV Funhouse.
yeah,
Yeah.
so I call Robert. I find Robert Smigel's number at SNL, where where he was working, but not regularly, because he would do these TV Funhouse shorts for SNL. And so I call his office. I call SNL. They put me through to his office, and he picks up the phone. And he was like, "Hello," and I was like, "Hey, this is Nick. I'm calling from Adult Swim." He's like, "I gotta tell you, this is crazy. Like, I'm never in my office. Like, he doesn't work from that office. He has other things to
Wow.
do." And so I was like, "Well, that's just great timing then, because I would really love." Is like, "Do you know Adult Swim?" And he was aware of Adult Swim because he's a comedy guy. And he and I was like, "I would, I'm now, working in development here, and I would love to make a show with you, and I think it could be great." And he goes, I love the idea. I think what you guys are doing is really interesting, but you just simply cannot afford me. Like, it's just not going to be an option." And he's really honest with me. He tells me that his, son is autistic and has these just like costs that are, like associated with his care. And he's like, it's just simply not going to happen at the way you guys are doing Adult Swim, you know? And he was like, "But I really appreciate the call." And I was like, "Oh, well, I appreciate your honesty." He's like, "Well, look, I can't do it, but I know somebody who I think would want to do it, who you could afford." And he's like, "There's a guy named Dino Stamatopoulos. He is a genius, and he'll do it for for the peanuts that he'll pay," or something, joking. And I go, "Amazing." And he gives me his number, and I call my brother, and I was like, "Hey, there's this guy Dino Stamatopoulos who used to write on a show we loved called Mr. Show." And he's like, "Oh, Dino wrote all the sketches we love." Like, my brother was like a super
Wow.
comedy nerd, and he goes, "All like the best bits on Mr. Show were written by this guy." And so I'm like, "Well, that's, I mean, amazing." So I call Dino and I say, "Hey, I got your number from Robert Smigel. Like, I am a fan. Like, I understand you wrote X, Y, and Z, and I would love to like talk to you about a TV show." And we came up with a show called Moral Laurel, which was like a stop motion show.
Oh
And
yeah,
then
yeah.
and
Yeah.
at this time, we're making, Robot Chickens, we're Seth Green is, and Robot Chicken starts being developed, and it just sort of, and they had come to us because they were sort of
Robot
toy
Chicken.
nerds, Robot Chicken.
Yeah.
And so it sort of started growing, and then, we put those guys together because they're both making stop motion shows. And then, you know, we start watching these shorts online, these small animated things, and it's like being made by a guy named Tim Heidecker and Eric Wareheim, and then that becomes Tim and Eric. We reach out to them, and Dino knows them because of their relationship to Bob Odenkirk. It's just like you start growing it, it becomes a very like 1 degree kind of thing. If I were to say how all of those first shows really got made, and it was really from that one phone call, right? And it was
Moxie.
like, yeah, well, I mean, you can call it moxie. I mean, it's just sort of not knowing better. I didn't know until, we started having some real success. Like, I didn't know how it ran out here, in Hollywood. Like, the agents, like, I never once called an agent, and I didn't realize that agents really hated me, because at some point they'd heard that I was calling their clients directly. And I understand, like, I love my agents. Like, I understand the purpose of them, but I really didn't. I thought it was a very entrepreneurial place. Like, it was like, no, we didn't think anybody knew of us or cared about us. Like, I still to this day would be like, oh, I worked for this thing called Adult Swim that was on the Cartoon Network. I mean, for so long, that's just how we talked about it. I didn't know who knew of it and who didn't know of it. It felt this very underground thing, you know? And so, but it was this, I think it was it's a flow thing. I don't know. And when you talk about the interests or like the Forrest Gump element of it, I mean, if I look even at that like microcosm of like how we built, those early shows, so much of it just came through, I think, like leaning into whatever was moving forward and
It's
not
awesome.
being resistant to, and trying to figure out something that might make sense or be better,
Yeah.
It's a path of least resistance thing, which is how I've sort of brought my whole career. Is like, I'm not, I'm not trying to, push something that doesn't feel right, like, you know what I mean? You gotta,
100%.
yeah.
When I was, there was a period of time where I used to be a boom operator for the Real World, and I remember thinking that it was going to be. I had no idea how to go from being a boom operator or a camera assistant to a director, which is what I wanted. I wanted to be a director for MTV shows at the time. That's what I thought was the coolest thing I could be doing. And but they weren't like really. There were very few examples of that working out, and it was such a small community, and I really thought everyone had kind of just pegged me as like crew guy. You're a crew guy. And there one day I went to this Chemical Brothers concert, and I was on all kinds of ecstasy. It was the greatest night ever. And I met this dude that at the time was starting this like this internet entertainment company. It's basically YouTube. At the time, it was an early version of YouTube. They spent all their money and it didn't work out, fast enough.
What was it called?
It's called Load TV.
Okay.
Low TV. It's this really like high energy, aggressive CEO. Just this, it was so brilliant. And he had like 50 million bucks, and they just burned through all of it in like a year. And then Andy Dick was
Sick.
there, and then there was some kind of like sexual like some kind of sexual there was all.
I mean, once you said Andy Dick was there, there's clearly followed by some sort of sexual problem.
That was one of the biggest disappointments of my whole life. Was I always thought Andy Dick was the funniest person ever, and he's hilarious. But what an incredible disappointment working with him. He is such a disaster, such an incredible disaster. I feel so bad for. It's like I'm in recovery. My heart goes out to anyone that's struggling. But that was a real disappointment. But anyway, this guy offered me this gig, and I actually went the next day to this interview, and he offered me. He was like, ended up getting this, working for this company for a year and be able to produce my own clips. And I was able to segue that then later, because I was also interviewing all these celebrities, into being a director for MTV. And so it's like I can relate so much to this Forrest Gump your way into things. And but it's like Ben makes a good point. I mean, in no way taking away from the necessary thing that you have to have, which is like an excitement and a curiosity and an openness and even a fearlessness to take advantage of those moments when they happen. And it sounds like you have that.
Well, yeah. I mean, look, I would say, even hearing you say it, I'm trying to think of a point, and I have no. I think this is I'm not saying this is the right way. I just don't know if I personally had ever, even in my adult life, sort of thought, oh, there's something I want to do. Like there was no job. I was like, there was no job. I'm like, oh, I want to be the head of a network, or I want to run this, like that kind of like goal oriented, like how do I get there, is just not how I've thought about my career. I mean, if you told me now I could work with, I could, I sort of I found what I like and what I'm good at. And I think that is
Explain.
well, I think that my advice to someone is like understand what it is, not just that you want, but like where you're additive and what brings you joy. And that's not really ever like a job. Like it's the action, it's the thing. There's something underlying and deeper that most likely, unless you told me you were an artist and that is how you have to express yourself, like that is more of a vocation, right? That's like
Yeah.
wanting to be a priest or a rabbi. I mean, if that's your vocation, that's different. But a profession, it's sort of like that underlying thing can be attributed to like many different professions. Like, so what is the underlying thing that brings you, like, that you're good at, that you're additive to, and that you find joy in? And mine, I do think I think my success in the field probably is like, I have a taste that other people agree with. I can give notes in a way that I think help make something better. But ultimately, like, my thing is that I facilitate other people's intentions, right? Like, I am good at helping someone, and what I enjoy doing is helping someone make their thing the best version of their thing,
That's a very
right?
Rick Rubin.
And that it is, and yeah, and I've spent a lot of time with Rick. I think Rick does it in even more sort of global way. But yeah, I think that he's able to see something, you know, in something, and whatever that is. Yeah, maybe that is really similar to Rick. But I think for me, yeah, but it's applicable to basically anything. It's like if it's talking to Ben about a project he's working on or a business he wants to, it's like I just like to I enjoy the conversation and the building and helping someone. And it's not that it's like necessarily like egoless, but it is in that I'm pretty good at understanding what someone wants and not making it the thing I want. Like, I understand what you are ultimately trying to do, and I feel that is not always clear to even to the person making it. And I think that works very well in TV and film, because someone needs a producer, they need notes, but also, and often they're resistant to it because this industry sort of says that that's not that important. But I've always been like, well, Faulkner needed an editor. Like, great writers trust these people to help them make their thing better. And when I say better, the best version of it, right? And I've located that as being the thing that makes me happy, but also I think that makes me, like, helpful. That's the additive thing I have. No matter what that is, like, I'm good at talking to somebody, understanding what their intention is, and helping them see through it and get there in maybe the best way.
Sick.
So
It's weird that you're such a shitty friend. But wish you'd
I
spend
mean, I
more.
would like,
I wish you'd spend
I,
more time with your friends behaving that way, not just
I, I,
professional.
dude, I don't even have anything to say to that.
I'm just kidding. You're an amazing friend. Just
No, that's beautiful. That's a beautiful way of explaining
But,
what it
and
is you do.
again, I'm not sure, and obviously that's just me, but I do think that my sort of, when I would talk to anybody about what they want, when they're like, oh, I want to run a network, or I want to be a producer, it's like, it's sort of why. It's because, like, the opportunity, I guess what I'm saying is the opportunity is on some levels much bigger, right? So it didn't matter if I was the reason I brought that thing up about me being a magazine editor was I was like, I felt very similar. It took me a little bit of time, but I was like, oh, that thing I enjoyed doing then can easily be grafted on to what I ended up deciding was my job at Adult Swim, right?
so when did you
To
figure that out?
advice.
Because I think like crystallizing the thing that you enjoy and you're good at, and then using that in some ways as a compass to navigate or manifest in these other environments is really cool. Was that at Adult Swim? Like, how did you decide, like, oh, that's a gift I have
I
that
think, yeah,
overlaps
I
with a
think it was
need that
probably
exists?
a few years. I think in at Adult Swim is probably when I started to figure it out, that was because I sort of I think it was actually probably I definitely like crystallized that idea later in my life. Like that took me a while after Adult Swim, after I'd started this company, this animation studio called ADHD. Well, by the way, this is, that I did for Fox.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I was like, here's an example. I had left Adult Swim and I was going to start this animation studio that on some level reductively for Fox you could say was Adult Swim for Fox and FX, right? And I was like, well, I don't, why would I leave this one thing that's really successful that I really enjoy doing to just do it again for someone else? And I was like, all right, well, the opportunity, I can get another opportunity. One thing I could do is learn the production of it, right? Like I'll handle all the, I'll run the physical production and make the animation. That's something we never did at Adult Swim. So I get to do that, but also like I'm afforded this absolutely new opportunity, right? But I really felt like there was this thing that was nagging at me where I didn't want to just make animation anymore. Right. Had thought I was having a little bit of success in making like live action comedies. And I made a show called Children's Hospital and it had won this Emmy. And I was like, oh, this is like, I could do this. And this is really exciting. And it's a new thing. And that's what I want to do. So when this other opportunity came around, I was like, I don't know. It's like just going to make animation and I'll just be that guy. And the people that were, running Fox at the time, who I loved, who, were basically said to me, a lot of people can do this other thing, right? You have a lane that is very sort of specific. No one else can really do animation. Like you're one of only a handful of people. So you better do it. It would be like running ESPN and then saying you don't want to do sports anymore.
Yeah.
And that's where I looked at the opportunity. I go, well, creatively, is that what I want? And someone else may have not taken the job then because they would have gone, I want to figure out how I'm going to, take that side of my career and I'm going to go make, giant, live action TV shows and movies. And that's, I think, probably then when I looked at it and said, well, what is it that I really enjoy doing? Like, I kind of don't give a shit what I'm making. I just want to be making something. So if that's where I'm the most useful and there's the most opportunity, but I get to do the thing that I like, then why am I trying to move away from that? Like if I'm, I'm able to continue this path, and that to me is probably the moment where I was like, all right, then who gives a shit? Who cares if like on one level my ego is like, oh, you should be going and doing this other stuff. It's like, well, no, because fundamentally that's not what I care about. What I care about is the process of making stuff.
So
And yeah, that's probably the moment that I was like, okay, because it meant I was going to, sign a 5-year deal that, would take,
yeah.
most of my time to do something I thought I was trying to get out of.
Well, you were like, I want to work with Murdoch. I've been spending my whole life trying to figure out how I could get in the family.
Gonna work with Murdoch.
This is,
I just
if it's making cartoons,
So be it.
so be it. That's
No, but my question for you is, have you fucked up at all? Like, have you ever gone away from what is this sort of core compass? I mean, in any other way, actually, also, like, to the painful lessons part, have
Yeah.
there been any things where you're like, oh man, that stings? Or that, like, I fell down, but
Yeah.
here's what I learned from that. Because I don't know any big fuck ups you've had.
I mean, honestly, I've listened to the podcast and I feel like on some level, I do feel like I haven't had I just haven't created a career that feels
What about
like
that affair that you had?
dude, I fucked that one up, dude.
yeah.
You haven't had a successful affair.
That porn
But
addiction.
even that affair was successful.
That
No,
porn addiction
guys,
made
that
you
had
so impotent.
it was so clear. I've absolutely not had an affair. No, it's
The
funny.
time you're on To Catch a Predator, was that?
But I skated out of that one. I'm telling you,
I didn't sign the release.
I didn't sign the release. How do you even know about that?
Suckers. I knew it.
Look, I think yes. On the larger level, I don't feel I haven't. I guess what I'm even talking about. I just haven't set the business career side up to feel like I could have had I just haven't set it up to have like failures like that. You know, when I heard Blake talking, it's like these giant business, like I just haven't done
Yeah.
that. So no, I will tell you the big fuck ups. Yeah, I've had like very bad anytime that I've thought there's an and it's funny when we go back to this opportunity. Let's just say like on specific projects, right?
Okay.
When I think that there is an opportunity for whatever reason, let's say a hole in the market. This person is successful and I don't listen to like my gut on this. I'm not going to enjoy this person or this person can't do it, but I see like the dollar sign in front of it where I'm like, oh, I know I can sell this thing. I've almost always been right that I could sell it, and it's been a awful experience.
Interesting.
And it's got me in bed with people that I don't like, that make me feel bad, that take up way too much of my time to make things that I'm not proud of. You
See,
know,
that's
and
a
and
painful lesson. That's a
100%. I mean, and that's what I'm saying. It's maybe on the, I don't want to say smaller scale, but it's like it is on this. And I mean, luckily, I have this amazing. Do have this incredibly insightful, intuitive wife who is very good at telling me that person, you know, and part of it, you know, that person is not a good fit, right? That that energy is not right, and the more I've listened to Amantha, the more I've avoided those. But there's definitely other times where I'm just like, put my head down and I'm like, all right, that's it. And again, I've been right about the opportunity. I just they're never successful. Something implodes that they make my life so much harder than it needs to be. It's the reward has never uh it's never been greater than the pain in it. And at least in my experience, it's never been like, oh, I fucking hated that person, but good God, man, we made 2.5 Men and we're in the 20th season and I'm being paid hundreds of millions of dollars.
Yeah.
Like I've not had an experience like that. Any of the success, any of the successes have been on shows that seemed slightly more in the flow. Like I've not been able to muscle my way through it. And the times that I have, even if they sell, even if they go, they don't last and they were painful. You know, it was absolutely a diminishing return.
one thing that you shared with me that I found deeply inspiring was realizing it was sort of the name of your company, not
Mm,
AGHD, but you can
the
share it.
work friend. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Like, what was the name of the company, your production
Well, I
company?
have well the current one, because I've wanted them all to have the same name. I have Friends Night,
Yeah,
which was
that's the
my
one I'm
original
thinking
one,
of.
and then even the one that I created now that's just focused on animation is called Work Friends, because I've been trying to, you know, I was listening to what I actually was pretty moved by the Blake one. I thought that lesson he said he learned from his dad and that trip you guys go on, because I've known you've done that, you guys
Oh
all do
yeah.
that trip, but I didn't understand its origin story. And I mean, on some, I've been trying to, you know,
Well, share
I
what
guess
was
low
the
key.
origin of Friends Night? Like, what was the theory behind the title of that company?
Well, there was this when we all basically moved to LA. My brother had moved here and didn't have kids yet. And there would be, we tried to, we all were at this bar, this dive bar. We'd go all every, you know, once a month or something. We would go to like some dive, you know, fun, weird LA dive bar. And we'd pick this place that is no longer around that I absolutely loved called the Smog Cutter. And we were all there. It's about 6 of us guys, and we're all sort of somehow related to this industry in, you know, some way. And we're all together, and this woman I mean, basically the woman at the bar, uh, what, you know, she's like, oh, where, you know, something about all the ladies, and no ladies tonight, it's just the guys. And she's like, oh, I love it. It's a friends night. And I realized at that moment, yeah, it is a friends night. It's very important that we, especially in this industry where everyone is very competitive, you know, that, and I think that you have to support everyone. You know, it's a lonely town. Like LA is very lonely in that way.
Yeah.
And so and we were all new here. And I was like, all right, you know, this is going to be a space where we can all share projects with each other. We can all share the things we're working on. Everyone's going to be very supportive of each other. Everyone's going to, like, you know, just simply either gas each other up, being able to break off, talk about things that they're working on. And that space is really, really important. and that the idea of having friends that, and not everyone is in the same, doing the same thing. Like, it had grown and you'd bring in like other people come to a dinner here and there. But for the most part, a lot of people living here is working in TV and film. And it was like, we need to have this group, and we need to like understand that the friendship is like obviously paramount to the work, and that we're all there to also support and help each other out. And that is just something that when I talk to people about moving to LA, one of the, especially as a writer, I'm like, it's fucking brutal. Like, you have no friends, right? That's why you see all these people at coffee shops. It is a lonely art. You are sitting alone writing something, and everyone is competitive with you. And it is not a place where it's easy to meet people, especially, now. And so, there other people, stand-up comedians have this rapport. They're all in the green room together. They're all touring together. You can,
I'm
all these
so
improv.
jealous of the rapport comedians have.
Totally. I mean,
Oh,
look,
man.
there's also like, you can move here and go to like UCB or Second City or Groundlings and like have this improv group. But so many people move out here and there's nobody there.
Yeah.
Right. Like and it's very hard to like find a community at all. So that
You can
idea of
become
like,
an alcoholic and you can make a bunch of friends. I have to say,
I mean,
I think
honestly, for real.
so many of my best friends I'm in recovery. So many of my best friends I know from recovery. And that's a funny thing to suggest to someone. I mean,
He's like,
it's so funny.
get
Are you
addicted to
slightly
recover.
alcoholic? Like, are you like, are you a sex addict? Yeah, I like sex. Like, is it kind of dangerous for you? Like, there's a group. And yeah, he's like, I don't know, maybe you stop denying it. I really don't think I'm too bad. Tried to help you out.
Well, I think so. Yeah. So the idea of I do like. I mean, by the way, that's also very true. So you get at your bar group, and then ultimately you get your recovery group. But I do think that
You can't be a terrible stand-up comedian and then hang out with the comedians, because I think that if someone sucks, at least this is what I picked up on comedians doing Coffee with Cars or whatever that show is,
Yeah.
that if someone sucks, that everyone avoids them like the plague.
I mean, yeah, if you're really, really terrible, sure, but that's probably the case in most things. But I do think that there is this sense of coming out here and or just road dogging it and like being like just seeing the same people. Like, everyone understands like you're kind of in it together, and while it can be like super competitive and people can be assholes, there is a sense it's easy to find the community. In my experience with my stand-up friends, like you find your scene kind of quickly, and that's just simply not the case. So my thought was, I want to always work with my friends or have my friend, like, that's the other thing. And now I not that I'm like questioning that, Ben, but like after like listening to Blake and its other thoughts I've had, I definitely have thought, you got to work so hard, and I work all the time, and like everything is sort of work. Like, I'm always thinking of, it's like always like the thought process is constantly like, how can I this thing, can that thing, if I read a book, can you make that into something? It's like, all right, well, you got to like try to work with your friends. Like, you got to, you got to make that the goal. I don't know if I don't know if that's the ultimate goal anymore, is that you work with your friends, but I do think you should work with your friends. Like, you should like these people you work with. That's a big fucking painful lesson.
I started this podcast because among other reasons, because I really, as an artist, I really miss the camaraderie of a set that I used to experience and love working in TV. And I was so excited to do this with Ben, and I was like, that'll be the camaraderie that I've been dying for. And then
How's
Aaron,
it panning out for you?
it's panning out great. It's panning out great. It's panning out great. Yeah, I don't know what kind of passive aggressive statement that was.
Ben's really, I really get Ben going.
But making pals with Aaron, and I agree. It's just as like life is so much happier when you got a couple buddies to ride with. It is just such a better place.
I like I said, every time that I felt like the pain that we're talking about was when that was just simply not the case. And like I said, it's just never been worth it, especially in this kind of like creative endeavor. It's just never seemed worth it.
Do you
And
roll
yeah,
with Rick and with do you are you is it Dan Harmon or which guy which one of the
was
dudes are you
canceled.
close with?
Oh no. Well, I'm not. I mean, it's been so long since I'm not probably wouldn't say I'm probably close with either of the guys anymore. It's been like 10 years now. And so the way that Rick and Morty happened is, I mean, I absolutely respect both of those guys,
Yeah.
forever. I've known Dan. Basically, the very quick story of Rick and Morty is that I'd known Dan for a really long time. Again, all through One Degree of Separation. That guy, Dino Stamatopoulos, that Robert Smigel told me to talk to.
Hmm.
Dino was like, you got to talk to Dan. They were best friends. And he's like, you got to talk to Dan. And so I was talking to Dan, and Dan was very similar. Like, you can't afford me. It's like, I'm on a
Yep.
path. He had just, was making Community or just about to make Community.
Oh yeah.
And he was like, but you should meet this dude, Justin Roiland. He's a fucking genius. You should talk to him. He's young and he's like really like a go-getter. So I talked to Justin, and he's absolutely like insanely smart and creative. And like, I'm like, oh, this guy's great, but he's also like has like no experience, and it's like almost too many ideas. Like, he's out of his mind. And so I say to Dan, he's a genius, but I can't run that show. Like, 'cause I'm working at Adult Swim full time. I would make a show with him if you run the show and you help him make it, because he just needs someone to help him contain his ideas and to like give it, help birth it. And he was like, it's just not going to work. So time goes on, a year or two go on, Community's successful, but then it's not renewed.
Yeah.
And I go, all right, he's figuring out what his next project is, and will it possibly come back in another form? And I go, now is the time. I can't stop thinking about Justin. Why don't you do the show with Justin? We get it going. And then if your show gets picked up or it moves somewhere else, you get Community again, then you'll leave. And this guy, you get to get paid off of it. You get to have helped him start the thing, and you've put him on the right track. So we start working on Rick and Morty, and, make a lot of changes, really develop it and write the script and produce the pilot. And right when that was basically finishing up is when I left Adult Swim. So we got it really right on its path, protected it up until it's sort of getting ordered, and then wasn't there. So, I've loved those guys, but they got so, heads down and making it. And I was doing my own thing that we, after
Sure.
starting it, um,
A
you
killer.
know, yeah,
Cool.
which is,
You put
by
it
the way,
together.
that's, there's this
You
other thing
clicked
that
it.
like, totally. And I sort of feel this way in
Yeah.
general, but I remember when I started at Adult Swim, someone told me, I can't remember if it was Lazar, we were just talking about Ted, maybe it was something Ted Turner said, where he goes, there's pioneers and there's settlers. There's just two types of people, that's it. And the pioneers want to like start the town, and then the settlers want to, take that thing and make it run right, and Ted Turner was a pioneer. I feel Mike Lazo is a pioneer. I very much enjoy the setting things up, getting it going, but the idea of staying on something forever, like, running that thing is never been sort of, I think, as interesting to
It
me.
takes a big person to be like, hey, I'm passionate to be a settler. When I hear the stories of the Wild
No
West,
way.
I say,
Settlers are. I mean, I think
think
settlers
it's
is a big gig too. I mean, it's
totally,
like
it's a critical thing. The town dies without the settler.
no, I mean, by the way, this is a huge thing, right? Ben, this is what I'm talking about. People not really knowing what it is that they want and what brings them joy, and what it's like, yeah, I hear there's so many writers in Hollywood. I would say 90% of them are like, I want to be a showrunner. I don't know. I mean, I don't know how much you guys talk about TV, but the job of the showrunner is the name. It's to run the show. And they think it's like it's like being a journalist and wanting to be an editor. It's two totally different jobs. Like, being a showrunner is brutal. It's managerial for the most part. It's like making sure everything's moving. It's making, yes, there's the creative element of it, but it is not being a writer anymore. It is interfacing with the network. It's making sure the budget stays on. It's making sure that
yeah,
actors are happy. It's doing all of that stuff. It is a entirely different skill set than being a writer. And people think that it's this thing like, oh, that's the thing I want to be. And you're like, you might just be awesome being a writer. and not having that responsibility, and not, you might not be the best at communicating with people, like you might not have the managerial skills to run it, or the macro, sort of bird's eye view to understand how an entire, TV show or film is supposed to move. And I think that that's where people just don't know. And it's like, yeah, a settler, like the idea of going to like, feeling comfortable, just going, all right, something was set up here. I know how to keep that ship sailing. That's like a huge deal.
Yeah, I totally agree. To be someone
And
who
no,
loves
but it doesn't
operating,
feel sexy. And I
no, but
know it
it's
doesn't, and that's what's crazy.
I think operations, like being excellent at that and having passion for that, is incredible. I have one last question. I know we're past the hour, but I think we
Oh,
started a little
totally.
after the
By the way,
hour.
was this, you can keep me whatever,
Yeah,
but also, is this interesting at all?
yeah.
Like,
I
I
find
haven't
this
like shared anything fucked up or anything.
no, I actually find this
I'm
super.
into it.
And I
All
think
right.
I'm
the
into
things
it.
which I pull from it, like, I only think of, like, what's the stuff that I would relay to the kids? And I feel like following interest as opposed to opportunity, or, like, how much more important it is to, like, I feel like so many people wanna be interesting, but you're like, "Well, just worry about being interested, and, like, the rest will follow." And I feel like it's cool to see your journey there. I'm curious, like, once you arrived at your passion, like, "Hey, I have a passion, a skill to help people manifest their ideas, and
Mm.
I can help do that well." You have a really cool ability to identify talent before the world is aware of some of these people. And like some of the folks you've referenced were like, hey, they were working in Saturday Life. They'd obviously already been in that certain altitude. But then once you got to a certain altitude, you started finding people who were kind of really on the rise. And I'm curious, like, what are the things that turn you on in that regard that you see and you're like, oh, that's dope. Like, what are the things that trigger your interest?
I mean, something and I just hasn't gone away from me. I just like am very interested in what like kids are doing. Even when I was like, why are people, gravitating towards Adult Swim, right? Like that. It was like when I, first
Weed.
saw. Yeah, weed. Why? But but again, yeah, dude, there's a lot of kids smoke weed. They don't all gravitate towards something. And I think that it really excites me to see like a scene or a group of friends come together, right? Like to me,
That's a cool that's
and
cool.
that to me is like I get really like energized by seeing it. So it's like obviously one of the big, probably at this point the most interesting version of that is when I saw Tyler the Creator, basically just on Fairfax skating when he's 18 years old, and had seen these videos that they were making.
So
And
what give me the story of that. Like, how did you first were you driving up Fairfax? Had you seen the videos?
well, someone had sent me a video very early on for this song French, and I don't remember who. There's a guy named Jamie James. There's the one guy who's like a true. Now I remember, is a true like A&R dude, like music, like knows his job is specifically to know who is like if someone's made a song and it could possibly be interesting. Just the earliest version of that. And so we were all friends with this guy, Jamie James Medina. He's like got insane taste. Sometimes the person will become big or not, but it's always interesting what he cares about. And he had he's like, these kids are making this music on Tumblr, and I think you'll find it interesting. And so I listened to it, and then I go watch this one video for French, and I like encourage you to look at it because I mean they're so young in it. And I was like, holy shit, this is I and then I drive by Fairfax and I see what's going on Fairfax. And I'm like, this really young. I mean, it's just early on. I'm like, I can't believe the level of quality these guys are making something on their own. Like the video, it feels so like much like early Jackass. And you're like, but it's shot well, the music's good, it's very, very funny, and it's fucked up. And so I'm like, all right, and it's a group of friends. It's not just like one person. It's clear who the leader is, but you're like, whoa, this is just like, it feels like there's an energy of a scene happening here. And then when you start like digging deeper into it, you're like, there's like a lot of black kids skating. Like black kids are getting really, really into skateboarding, and you're not seeing that represented at all on television. You're not
Yeah,
seeing
in
that
magazines.
represented in magazines or anything. It's still, and you're like, but I'm talking to someone else. I share this video with some friend of mine in Atlanta. He's like, oh yeah, yeah. It's like, there's tons of black kids skating here. And you're like, oh shit, there's like a movement happening that is feels like very, very real. And this kid is going to be the leader of this scene. He's like so talented. He is clearly creating a fashion, that is being replicated by other kids on Tumblr. And you're just like, and he's very, very funny. So that's how I get excited about that. And similarly, I get really excited about this dude, Zach Bryan, who I started following for years, who's this young, country singer who's now absolutely enormous. Right. And you're just like, oh, there's something going on with like young, like whatever this young alt country scene is. And a bunch of like white dudes, these bros who just simply need to like get with like, high emotional IQs. They need to cry. And you're like, there's something going on here. And I just feel like I'm very moved by that. And that might be from like going to punk shows and things like that growing up. But you're just like, there's something about getting very interested in where a community and like a friend group starts to form, and that seeing people like really want that is something I just feel like everybody's going to want forever, no matter how much they get locked into some VR headset. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so that's where I've always sort of looked. Obviously I can spot certain kinds of talent. Like I feel like I'm like, oh, that person's actually like operating at a very high level, like, oh shit, like they're way funnier than their age, or they're crafting jokes a certain way, or their music is like really sophisticated. And it's, like, okay, you can see the thing, but it's mainly when I'm like, all right, there's a community forming around this and the general zeitgeist building around it, and why. And I get really excited about the why to me.
It's super
And
cool.
yeah.
Yeah.
Can we have a contest where so I will pitch an idea for a cartoon, and then Ben can pitch an idea for a cartoon, and you tell me which pitch you would take.
All right.
So this is my pitch. Okay, it's called Space Adventures, and it is in space, an improv group, and one of them won the lottery, and so they have this unlimited budget to make shows. And their first, by the way, this cast of characters, man, what fun! First of all, you have the kind of the blue collar schmuck who won the lottery, and he was just seduced by the hot girl who just wants to be famous, into spending all of his money on this. And then there are two slacker twins and another retired ninja. That's the group, and that's the improv group. Okay, so and then the first episode is they do a kind of a prank on To Catch a Predator. And because it's in space, they're very excited. No one's ever seen To Catch a Predator in space. And the joke is that the predator is instead of coming upon a bunch of cops, the person that plays the child is someone that actually turns into a unicorn every now and then. So that's the catch is like, they got to have him be a child when the predator comes in and not turn into a unicorn, which happens more frequently than like a werewolf, which is like once a month. If you're a unicorn, a were unicorn, you turn so it's like, that's the challenge. Okay, that's my show.
All right, Ben.
I mean, I like this challenge, so I won't just bail on it. Mine is sort of the inside workings of like kind of an early Aztec temple, and just the pressure the team feels like now that they've put out this idea of like a rain dance and a sun dance and all these things. And it's just like the society is really depending on the success of some of the activities that they're promoting.
First of all, I was really hoping you were going to pitch SEAL Team 7, but the guys that were almost there. I would say that that's a long-standing joke between me and Ben. Although I did feel didn't you have SEAL Team 7 on the show?
I don't know what SEAL Team Pat's on.
Pat, I didn't even know that you could be on a different SEAL team.
We didn't ask him. We had a follow up.
Team.
Yeah, you have to have a follow up.
That is a SEAL. Should we have a
Ben
follow-up?
al-
What number he is? What number
Ben
of SEAL?
always used to tell me he'd met some guy in SEAL Team 7, and I would always joke that, well, it's not quite as good.
Oh my
The
God.
guy in
Oh my
SEAL
God. I
Team
cannot wait
7.
for Pat to listen to this. Oh, he will put Ben in the biggest like vice lock. Oh, this is gonna be terrific. Yeah,
I wasn't even listening.
Ben, that does sound like something that you would say about Pat. That's amazing. Because he's on a SEAL. He's a SEAL, but he wasn't on SEAL Team 6. And
No,
all
he
of us,
just, and I always just thought it was a very funny idea for a movie. The guys that got there just 2 minutes too late. I know that's probably not how the 5, 6, 7, and that's not how the teams get organized, but I like the idea of it. I would say in this contest, in this fictional contest, I to take it seriously as my job as a TV development guy,
yeah.
I would say that I'm going with Ben's idea,
What the fuck?
and I'll explain why. I think that for my taste and where I've seen success in TV, and this is also, you learn these things, everyone has their own thing, is that one is, I'm interested that you did yours, basically you recreated your sort of real world interest, which I like. I think you have a sort of real world
did.
quality like in space.
Yeah.
My feeling is that there's TV is, especially like comedy and specifically animation, has to be either low concept and then like high concept, like high execution, like weird execution. So, and Ben's, or it has to be vice versa, like this very kind of weird, the whole like idea is fucking crazy, but then the execution is very much just like family stuff. Do you know what I mean? Like very grounded, like relationship stuff. So it's like one is low, one is high. And that's where you sort of find this great middle. And I think yours was probably operating it as like, it's both this like crazy concept, but then also the execution's really crazy. So it ends up being a little bit of a hat on a hat, where Ben's has this, I think, opportunity to be like, all right, it takes place in Aztec times. That's why it's animated. There's a bunch of, you can do some interesting stuff there, but it is
You can have some sacrifices.
It's some low concept. It's like this low concept of like a bunch of guys working this Aztec, but then the way that you could potentially execute those jokes could be at a very kind of weird high level.
Some rich stuff there. All right, we'll get to work on it.
You have a story of a journalist going into an interview with your the target of your story, and then all of a sudden that guy hiring you to run his network, which is awesome. And Ben, his wife, has a story that's so different, where she was a journalist for Rolling Stone, and then interviewed Joe Francis, Girls Gone Wild, and then was so famously assaulted during the interview by Joe Francis. But also, if you know Ben's wife, like maybe she was asking for it.
The craziest shit I've ever heard in my life. I'm gonna fight you when I see you.
I'm just saying, it was like there's a chance she wasn't not asking for it.
Definitely fighting you when I see you.
Listen, I'm being so silly about this, but then her definitely not taking a job with Joe Francis, but then turning that experience into like one of the best stories ever for Rolling Stone, and be like, if you think that I was going to leave out the fact that I was assaulted, you are nuts. And I like that so far, these are two of my favorite stories about journalists that aren't Fletch, because Fletch, when he did a story on that, he ended up with a new girl. He probably ended up with that girl who he saved from that situation. And he also got that fun day at the tennis club. That was amazing. And when he pretended to be Mr. Underhill, and I just think that Fletch is such a great show. That's how we're rounding it all up.
Yeah, no, I feel like around an hour is when the wheels fall off this show.
Exactly.
Oh, you guys
Nick,
really figured it out.
We got the hour. All right, brother.
I love you, Ben. Bye.
Love you too,
Thank
man.
you for having me on, guys.